Okay, I think we can begin slowly. Don't worry about the time. I'm not too worried. It's not going to be that long. I usually hate concentrating for longer than 15 minutes, so I don't expect you to concentrate for longer than 20 or so. We should be fine with time. I generally, especially with an audience like this, I like to keep things casual. So if you have a question, feel free to interrupt me. I don't mind. I can get back to it anyway. So feel free to interrupt, ask any questions, and I'm happy to engage in a discussion rather than I'm just throwing stuff at you and you're just sitting there and absorbing or falling asleep. So feel free to ask any questions. I'll try not to shake my head too much because I can already hear it. So this discussion or workshop is going to be about enterprise Drupal. A little bit about me. I don't really don't really like to talk about myself too much, but in this case, I think I have to. Who knows Acquia as a company? Cool. So for those who don't, Acquia is a relatively large company that works with Drupal. You've probably heard about Dries. That's the guy who started Acquia. Jem and I work for Acquia as well. I worked for Acquia as a technical consultant. I used to be a developer, and then I moved to a consultant role. I work with large clients across the globe, in the US, in Asia, in Europe, and help them with workshops, trainings, architectural plannings, and discovery workshops. Lately, I've been really interested in the actual business aspect of Drupal and how enterprises look at that. And I've seen that, especially in Europe, we are so fragmented and there's so many small companies that start up. People don't really have the necessary experience in dealing with larger clients. So I wanted to kind of channel all of that know-how that I pick up on my travels and help you guys and other small communities that I meet in actually engaging and making more money. So hopefully that's going to happen. This is not going to be a technical talk, not strictly technical. I will throw out a bunch of buzzwords and stuff that we have probably heard about, but it's not going to be a technical talk. I'm not going to even write up a single PHP code, and that should be fun, especially because PHP is not for the enterprise, as we know. I wanted to talk about products, why products are important, and why they're more important for larger clients than maybe for a small shop. How these large companies interact with you or with anyone who's a supplier, and how Drupal and open source, but mainly Drupal, fits into this picture, and what are the paradigms that really change, and through this change, we need to react, and our offering can be better because we know what their problems are. So that's what I would like to talk about here and talk to you guys about. So first of all, what is enterprise? What does that, where do you put an enterprise client? When does it begin and where does it end? What is it to you? When is a company enterprise? When would you say that's an enterprise client?
When it's boring enough.
Good. Yeah, it's actually a really good point. Because enterprise customers and large companies, they love processes. If you interacted with any of them, then you know that there are sales and there will be project managers, there will be stakeholders and directors, and there will be just a lot of processes around getting just stuff done. It's going to be hard. That's probably a good characterization. Of course, obviously these contracts have a large budget as well, but you have to deal with the pain of bureaucracy. The other thing about enterprises is that they love products. They love something that's tangible because they can just take it and give it to someone else, and they understand what it is. It's easy to communicate, it's easy to transfer, and the message of a product is simple. This is, I don't know, Windows, and this is what it does. This is Lotus Notes. I don't know why they put that up there, but anyway. And that does something else. The message is clear, there's a system, it does something. It's easy to market, it's easy to consume, and when you're dealing with a lot of people as your client, it's no longer just a small shop at the end of the street, it's now a big company with a ton of people who always want to involve. If you dealt with people, you know, everybody wants to express their opinion, everybody has an opinion about everything, especially with large companies. Everybody wants to have a say. And the simpler the message is, the easier it is to bring it across and have people accept it. If you use Salesforce or other systems on the internet, for instance, you can kind of get this idea of having a product, having something that just does this or does that. Now, Drupal as a concept, as a framework, it's not really a product, let's face it. I mean, it's a framework, it's kind of fuzzy. There was this talk in the morning, I saw the guy who had the presentation, you were the one. It's kind of this fuzzy thing. It's really hard to grasp what Drupal actually is. And selling just Drupal to a client is really hard, because what do they buy into? Maybe your client is educated, maybe they know that this is a framework, you can build stuff out of it, but it's hard to sell it as a concept. And a lot of times they just see it as a bunch of components. Tech people in large companies often refer to Drupal as something that's only for people in the know, you know, nerds, but by nerds I don't necessarily mean, I mean, they're developers as well, so who are they to call us nerds? But people who look down on a technology because they don't think it's mature enough, for instance. It's just a lack of education at the end of the day. But that's the perception that a person usually gets when we are only talking about Drupal. Drupal has a good brand, so do not mistake. All these big companies that you'll possibly deal with, they have heard of Drupal quite likely. Drupal has a really good brand globally, but in the local market, it's a bit different. I think especially in Europe, it's a really interesting situation, because every single small country, well, small country, I mean, when I talk about Germany, I'm not necessarily saying it's a small country, but they have their own thing. If you know, French people, they love their own stuff. Germans, they love Typo 3 and God knows why. And every other country just has their own specialties. So although Drupal is a good brand globally, it lacks the recognition locally. Now, the other thing is that into these big companies, Drupal often creeps in through developers. So establishing a relationship and getting developers involved into events like this is a really good way in getting the technology accepted. We actually, I think it was more through sales, but I worked with a large, I worked with Disney, and sometimes we have these NDAs, and I can't really say the names, but Jem's not going to report me. And I could say Disney? Okay. We don't have to beep it out. And there, Drupal went into the company because the responsible people were just interested in the technology, and the entry for getting Drupal up and running, because it's open source, it's free, it's extremely low. So if you're interested in, you're a developer or you're a technical guy, you can just install it and poof, it's done. And it creeps into through these cracks of these big companies, it just creeps in and gets accepted. So these are really interesting observations that I've seen. Now, how can Drupal actually become a product that you can market or you can sell? Kickstart is, I don't know, it's why it's Drupal Kickstarts, it's the Drupal Commerce Kickstart that I wanted to mention, is a really good example. Ecommerce, again, is a very fuzzy concept, just like content management. And what commerce guys did with the Drupal Commerce Kickstart distribution is that they took this concept of having an e-commerce system, and they actually built a functioning web store where you can just install the distribution, and you get a nice design, you get the configuration, you get all the workflows, and it just works. And that's the impression that a lot of these companies are looking for, that here, this is a web shop. Okay, that you can go to the back end and customize and change everything, but the first thing that they see is a functioning, well-built thing that will do a single thing or a concept, not just a dozen things, like as if you would just say, well, here's Drupal, you can build everything out of it. Because people don't get that message that here's a bunch of Legos. When you go to the store, sorry, I'm just really in love with Legos lately. If you go to the store, you buy the spaceship. You don't necessarily buy all the pieces unless you're really into getting the pieces. And it works the same way with big companies. There's another buzzword that I wanted to bring into the picture, which is the web experience management. That's something that big companies are nowadays looking out for. It's no longer just a content management system that they want. It's content management and more things, but I'll talk about that later. Now, big companies and processes, they love processes. As the more people you have, the more difficult it's going to be to communicate and rely on different units doing certain things. So in order to make that easier, you create processes. So this is how I do coding, this is how I do testing, this is how I do one thing or another. So in large companies, processes are a key part of the business, and we have to adapt to that, and we have to understand. And these large companies also are completely clear that failures happen, and there is a plan A, and then there's a plan B. If there's a failure, there's a backup, and we can do something. Well, in an ideal case. Not everyone is that smart, but testing happens quite often. I'm working with a project right now where there is functional test coverage for all the requirements, there is unit testing going on. There's going to be a really good session just after this one on continuous integration, which is a process around assuring the quality of your product as you're going ahead and developing. You're basically constantly making sure that as much as humanly possible that nothing creeps in within the development workflow. And going to a large enterprise, you're expected to know these things. You're expected to know about continuous integration. You're expected to know about functional testing, and these skill sets are essential when dealing with large clients. What makes it a product on a more technical level? Now, one of the things that is almost, this is going to be basically a set of requirements that I commonly come across, and feel free to interrupt me or extend it if you have seen something else. One of the big things is content workflow. For a small website, usually someone, if just logs in on the website, creates an article, submits it, posts it, makes it public, is sufficient. But as soon as you scale up the editorial team, you have more people creating content, you have different roles for approving content, and that happens reasonably fast in any large organization. You're going to end up with the requirement of having a content workflow. So having Workbench, for instance, Workbench module, who knows that? Workflow module is also another one that's been out there for a long time and been updated to Drupal 7 as well, finally, is basically an essential component to any of these sites. Sometimes, especially with overly bureaucratic organizations, they love to complicate things. And simpler is almost always better, of course, because you build a simple system, it's easy to maintain. So there's a risk involved in establishing all the workflows that the client needs. This is just a warning out there, and it's not necessarily have any conclusion to this, but that's just an observation that I made. So even though the client may possibly want all sort of fancy workflow controls, usually the set of features that these modules implement is sufficient. And if you're dealing with a client that wants way more or above that, a lot of exceptions, I would definitely encourage you to not necessarily question the client, because they're kind of bitchy that way, they don't really like to be questioned, but to figure out what's the underlying demand for a certain content requirement. One of my favorite examples is we were working on a business school website, intranet piece in Oxford, and one of their requirements was that secretaries and their kind of editorial staff can share a, what's it called, a week's plan with their students, which was basically, before it was basically just a PDF in which you have columns for the days of the week, and then you kind of share that with your students. So how would you do that in Drupal if you have to share this information with students? Would you set up like a event content type and then organize it into days and create a view that processes all that and displays something? Does it sound good? Well, it sounds good on paper and in theory, but as soon as you start implementing that, you kind of lock yourself in to that content type and that system. That view will be the only one that you can create. So we went back to the client and we asked, what do you need to get out of this calendar? Do you need any of the fancy functionality that comes with having an event content type? Do you need recurring events? Does your editorial staff know how to maintain that on a website? Because we can build it. I mean, you can see that you can create the content type, so you can create all the architecture around it, but it's going to cost you a lot of money, well, a reasonable amount of money, and you're locked into that system, so you cannot change the workflow, or if you want to change it, then you have to pay against someone to build that system for you. So we said, okay, we can do this, it will cost you X amount of money, or why don't you just use the existing workflow, like send a Word document around, create an Excel sheet, and export it into PDF and upload the PDF. It's not strictly a Drupal workflow, but from a human perspective, it works way better than forcing people to use our system because we believe that that's going to be the best solution for you. If the requirements don't necessarily require, if the requirements don't necessarily, they're not necessarily backed up with actual demand, then adding those complexities will cost a lot of overhead. And at the end, the client will not be happy because we haven't really solved their problem. They think they have a problem, but actually the problem is somewhere else. So this is the underlying message of simpler is better. The other common feature that people want is digital asset management. And that's why I was quite interested in the Scald presentation. You probably have heard about the media module. So media and Scald, basically, these are the only two ecosystems right now that are out there that provide an asset management where you can reuse components like files, PDFs, videos, audio, across the site. This is a very, very common requirement, even across different sites, which is a bit more difficult. The other big deal is configuration management. So in Drupal 7, we export configuration through features. We turn it into code, and then we can deploy. When we are building a website, the usual workflow is that we are building a code base, and then a code base slowly migrates from development to testing to production. Now, the reason why this is a problem, because user-generated content is being entered on the production end. And configuration is created when we are building the site, so it comes from the development side. So we have basically two directions where the database changes are going, and there's no easy way of taking that piece out and sticking it to the other side. Features kind of solves that problem for us. It exports the database content into code, and then we're deploying alongside the code deployment workflow. And that's kind of what we have to do in Drupal 7, and there's no alternative to there. Drupal 8 is going to solve that problem for us. So with that, Drupal 8 is going to be a lot more enterprise-friendly than it is now. Again, with these development, staging, and production, we go back to the same thing that enterprise companies, they love processes. And the deployment workflow is one such process where even through, and I just listed 3 stages, but it's quite typical to have 4 or 5 stages for a single website build. The other thing is multivariate testing. That's quite often a requirement. It's not, I wouldn't say it's clearly solved in Drupal, or at least we don't necessarily have a turnkey solution for it. It's Multivariate testing is essentially testing how your website reacts to, or what your visitors react to changes within, for instance, a given page. So if I'm preparing page A with two columns, will my click-through rate increase if I do just a single one? Yeah?
I would like to ask that outcomes refers to multivariate testing model, and you presented it, let's say, a year ago. So we tried that it's in a test state on Drupal.org, so it's pretty cool right now.
Is it?
Yeah.
Because I tried it, I think we've looked at it last year, and it was just a bit unclear on how well it works. Yeah, I would love to do that, because this came up quite a few times with clients that they wanted to know how to do multivariate testing with Drupal. It's not an easy thing to test, because you could create different layouts, and depending on the level of the change that they want to measure, you can do many things. You can just build different templates. You can configure different panels that you switch between. So exactly how you're solving the requirement it can be tricky, but there you go. There's already a module for that. A little bit about the web experience management is essentially you take a CMS, a content management system, and you add all sorts of social common functionality and features that a typical client will want. And nowadays, people call this WEM, or web experience management. So analytics is obviously a big one, spam filtering, email marketing, which is something that people often forget and they don't really budget for, asset management, and so on. And Drupal fits this niche really well because of all the things that I've just said. There are modules for these, and we can build a WEM easily out of it. And if it's sold as such, people at the enterprises, they can already position Drupal as a system capable of so much more than just a framework. So they can put it on the proper shelf, and they can understand. The tricks, there are a few tricks about how you're also interacting with enterprise clients. I wouldn't necessarily say that these are only relevant for enterprise, and that's why I put just client there. I think people should do these things to almost everyone, but I think these become more and more important when you're dealing with enterprise customers. I think the higher the budget, the people are more keen on following processes, making sure that they're not going to be responsible for any failures, and there's a lot more work involved from your side in actually building up the relationship. So one of the things is that selling through a working functional demo is usually much more effective than just selling them a concept. And that's a quite common trick that other enterprise products use as well. I wouldn't say it's a trick, it's just, again, going back to the product idea that you're selling something that works, it does the job, and you can make it clear that you can extend it, you can change it to do whatever you want, but selling first a functional, comprehensive package is much easier than selling everything and then reducing that. It's also about setting the expectations. Something that I hear a lot at Acquia, that my boss keeps telling me that I need to do better is managing expectations and setting expectations. And this is something that I think Jem talked about in his talk when we talked about the price of free. When you say that this is for free, people will expect that, they're already in their mind, they put you on a lower price tag, on a price shelf. So then getting a decent budget out of it is much, much more difficult than if you just say, well, this is how much it costs, and it's a product, it's a service that we provide, and that's just it. There is more added value because there's no license fees, but it's not free. And that's the same kind of expectation management, that if you don't oversell, if you don't say, well, this is a system that does everything, you just need to invest a couple €100,000 and it will do everything. But instead, you focus on a working, narrower target, their expectations will be set so that that system will know this, and if you add any value on top of that, they will be happy. If you oversell and you take away from it, they will be unhappy. An unhappy client is bad for your mojo. Strong brand and marketing. This goes back to establishing a relationship with the clients, especially with large clients. People love personal relationships, and the branding just emphasizes that and helps you to basically be remembered. The love of processes, the truck factor that also Jam talked about is quite key. These large companies, they have to tolerate failure, which means that if someone gets run over by a truck, the project cannot fail. So there have to be processes in place, and by the provider, you, as part of that process chain, will have to accommodate for that, so that if you're delivering a product, there should be processes around documentation and human failover. So everybody knows that things will fail. The main point is how you recover and how you move on, how you simply just fix things. It's not necessarily preventing the failure in the first place. So how you can actually enter this market? As a small web shop, it's really difficult. And I've been trying to help local web shops in Hungary to kind of open up and contact, especially to Western Europe and to the US, because there's obviously more money in there. But it's really hard. It's hard to get this relationship built up. It's hard to get the branding out. It's hard to establish any sort of channel of communication. And I'm actually not, that's why I put all the big three up there, Acquia, Wunderkraut, and Capgemini. Yesterday, I think I was talking to you about Wunderkraut being way more successful once they united all these 4 or 5 companies in Europe. Their reach became much larger simply because their recognition improved. Yeah. Mm-hmm. So what you get with a partnership with any of these companies is their branding power, their channels of contacts, and through that, basically, you can leverage and get into this world. Otherwise, it's really tough. The other thing is that the love of processes and the amount of people involved in projects, you as a delivery partner, you have to accommodate for that overhead, and it's a massive overhead. I think one of our successes in Acquia is due to our sales, simply the power of sales that we have. And a lot of dev shops that I know, maybe not you necessarily, but always underestimate the power of sales. I think we have, I wouldn't say 50%, but we have significant amount of people just doing sales. I know that in
the little Acquia brochure cards that are on the table,
mm-hmm.
the breakdown of the company.
Okay.
I think that 35% of the company is selling on.
Yeah, which is massive. If you think about your company, how many people are actually, I don't want to say actually doing stuff, and how many are sales, because I hope my sales friends don't see this, but how many people are actually focusing on the delivery, and how many people are actually focusing on communicating to the client, selling to the client? I think that's one of the key factors that a smaller company will find a much bigger challenge than one of the big ones. And that's probably the success of Acquia, the Wunderkraut team, Capgemini, and so on. They have a massive budget and a massive sales team. And that's something, unfortunately or fortunately, that smaller shops cannot compete with, at least not easily. So partnership to those companies is one way. The other way is partnering with other companies that have already established branding and clientele. For instance, design agencies are quite often the ones who have, because they're pretty, they talk to people, they are usually the ones who own really good relationships and really good bonds with the end clients. But they're not technical. They will not know how to build a website. They will not necessarily know the architectural requirements. That's not their profession.
But they tell a great story about
yeah.
it,
yeah.
right? Which is where us people on the technical side often really can learn a lot from those people.
Yeah, exactly. So they tell them an idea, they tell them a story, they kind of have them buy into the product without actually the product being there. So they're fantastic at that. Also, you have to understand the risks. The risk of, if you have this implementation, you have to be able to push back the client if it will actually risk the client's interest in the long run. It goes back to building a strong relationship and building trust with the end client. Building trust is really hard, and it's even harder with large clients. Once you're in, it's fantastic because of the difficulty of building a relationship. Once you're actually accepted, you get basically a reliable stream of revenue and contracts. But it's also really easy to break. One of the stories I heard from some friends in Hungary, they had a great client. They worked really well. The trust was established. And at some point, they had a chat in the elevator about some stupid thing about the same project. And some guy from that project was in the elevator. Next morning, or even that night, they got a call from the CEO. And the relationship took a deep dive. And that's just because the way they let themselves think about the relationship, the product and the project. And something that I found personally really difficult at Acquia, because our philosophy and the way we speak is always, we always say we are helping the customers. We don't always badmouth the customers, at least try not to. But we always emphasize that we are trying to provide value and we are trying to help. And that message is kind of helping us see things through that lens as well. So if you are encouraging people to think rather positively and constructively, it's not necessarily a facade, it's not a fake, because it does contribute to your local integrity as well as building this trust.
If you think of yourself as a stakeholder in your client's success, that's about the right.
Yes, exactly.
A failure is a failure for everyone involved. So
yes.
Focus on a success experience with people.
Yes, and it's not even technical at that point, and this is why I said this is not about technicalities, and it's not necessarily about enterprise. It works with every client, and it's just a general good business practice. But because so many of us are coming from a developer background, we don't necessarily know that. So that's why I thought it would be important to highlight. So again, you're part of your customer success, and if you think about it that way, the client will feel it that way. And that's what I think anyone would want. If you are involved in any project at your home, if you have an interior designer and that person is involved with you actually feeling better, you just have a great relationship, and you will go back to that person and you will recommend that person, and everything will just work. And if we can work that way with clients, then these projects will become a success. This is an outline of how such a project will actually be established. These are, again, things that are valid for a normal customer as well. But usually for enterprise clients, these are way more emphasized. These periods are way longer, and they actually budget for these. These are actually based on stuff that we do at Acquia. So those are the things I put after it. The first step is always to figure out what the client wants. We call this a discovery workshop. We usually spend 1 week to 2 weeks on a project, actually just simply from meeting to meeting, just asking, what do you want? How do you want this to function? We're collecting all the user stories and so on. But this is all budgeted for and paid for, so this is not charity that we do. And we make sure that the client understands that we are not working for free, and you shouldn't work for free either. You have to set the expectation that we're providing you value, we are giving you clarity on what you want, and we're helping you actually lower the risks of venturing into this project. Without a proper discovery, how can you actually build something that you don't even know what that should be exactly? Then of course you need to plan it, you have to architect it somehow, you have to build it, you have to have a team that actually does that. You need some sort of validation and testing before you go and launch it, even throughout the lifetime. That's why we are having audits quite frequently. Load testing is one. A lot of enterprise clients will actually maintain the same environment as they have on production in staging, and they will perform regular load tests before pushing an update out. How many of your current clients afford and do that? Probably not too many. Well, you work with large clients, so, right? You work with large clients though, so yeah, so that's an excuse. But it's expensive. But these companies budget for it and they have the processes and they need to handle the failure. Again, these tests are there as kind of part of this whole continuous integration process. They're there to provide a metric that our site passed the load test, the director can go to the CEO, well, you know, it passed the load test, we were safe to go live. And then, of course, there is additional need for maintenance and ongoing support. A lot of value that we are adding as a business, and I'm just saying these things so that this is something that you could give to the client or you could offer to the client, and clients want these things, is actually ongoing support. If something goes wrong with the application, they need someone to call and just discuss, and they don't necessarily want someone to blame, they want to resolve the problem. Again, you're part of their success, and if you can help them, then they will be happy. External audits are increasingly important as the companies go larger, because only a third-party review of an application can give them the assurance, the validity of their platform. Security audits and performance audits are something that we're doing, for instance, quite regularly. So I've talked about generalities, and I think I'll be closing it down soon. There are quite a few reasons why companies love Drupal, and even though you may not see, there's probably not a single enterprise company right now out there that hasn't evaluated Drupal. It's pretty much known, and and there are plenty of reasons to like it for. One of the things that we run, for instance, is LSD, and it's not the drug, unfortunately, is an abbreviation for large-scale Drupal, and we have, I don't know how many large companies that are a member of this kind of club. They pay a shit ton of money, like $50,000 per year, to be members of this club, where they just discuss and learn about Drupal and have the contacts. So this is how important and how much money these large companies have for the relationship part and the information gathering, the discovery. This is all part of that. The other paradigm that I've seen, this is a bit away from that, is as we are shifting to open source and we are enabling companies to do a lot more with a lot less, they become the product owners quite often. And a lot of companies don't necessarily know how to handle that. Because our web shops are small, we usually have a face-to-face relationship with the client. We have our developers talking to the end client, which is not always the best. They like it because they get immediate feedback, but the developers don't necessarily like it because they get constant pushes, they cannot plan ahead, and so on. And what I've seen that quite a few organizations that previously, they simply bought a product from Microsoft, they bought SharePoint, for instance, and they got a system, and it was a closed box, and they accepted that, and they took it, and that's what they have. Nowadays, what they have is they have Drupal, and we tell them, you can do anything you want with Drupal. So when they get it, they will start tweaking, they will start breaking it, and we need to be able to handle that. We need to be able to help them understand what it takes to be a product owner. They no longer just have a third-party service provider, a massive company like Microsoft giving them a box of stuff. They actually have the product, they hire a few developers, and they start tweaking it without actually knowing what they necessarily do. They do not have the processes in place internally for changes and so on. So quite a lot of projects actually are running into the ground because of that. And if we can help them and be part of that, even educate them. You are the experts of how this works. You have the authority of pushing the clients back with respect, of course, and helping them to actually realize these risks is a great. Mm-hmm. Yes.
And there is a problem sometimes that people lose the power or lose the information or are even in a position to lose their jobs.
Yes.
different departments, but we are also inside of the internal walls between the departments. I mean, besides technology, you also use this political feeling, what is said and what's the moment.
Yes. It's really important, and that's partly the reason why these large companies, they're so process focused, because processes change, people can accommodate to that, but internal politics is so hard, and it's so easy to let down the client. That's another story, but one of the failures that I've heard about was when a company went to, a smaller delivery company went to the meeting with a massive enterprise organization, and they basically sent one guy, and they asked them, so, okay, but where is your project manager, and where is the infrastructure guy, and where is your CEO? It's like, well, that's me. That's not a good way of building trust and helping people to spread all this political responsibility. So a show of force, not necessarily a force like punching them in the face, because usually that's not a good sign, but just a demonstration of the capabilities and the responsibilities, that everything is in order on your side of the table, is quite vital to set the relationship with each other. And of course, the cost of free, as Jam also talked about. Now, what's next, and where are things headed? I think Drupal is doing already great. There are a lot of reasons for that, but it's doing really well. You can see it on the success of Acquia or other companies. Capgemini is hiring like crazy these days. I'm sure Wunderkraut is hiring. So everybody's trying to grow and fill this market gap. And with Drupal 8, there will be so many changes that help the enterprises actually adopt. These things are the configuration management, which will be a lot easier and a lot more reliable than it is now. Simply the architecture is better. Aaron was telling me this on the trip here. Using the new and better open object-oriented pattern, it will be much more IDE friendly. So even if you if you don't really know Drupal that well, now it's relying on standard libraries like Symfony, and because of the object-oriented pattern and the way the code will be restructured in this new architecture, you can simply throw it into an IDE, and you will basically have immediate documentation. It increases the productivity from Drupal 7 in a significant way. The services that will be offered by core, so remote services, almost every Drupal site that I've seen out there has some sort of third-party integration. Having services being supported by core is going to be massive. It's going to have a huge impact. And distributions will mature. If you look at the distributions, Kickstart, they're already fantastic, and they're light years ahead of what they were in Drupal 6. If I think of the possibilities that Drupal 8 brings, I think that's going to be massive. So I think we are looking at quite a huge explosion on the Drupal market once Drupal 8 hits. It's going to be quite good for us. So thank you very much. Oh, sorry. Mm-hmm. Well, I think it's a valid concern, but I also see that there's less and less actual development work involved in building Drupal solutions. And when you are building Drupal solutions, you no longer really tweak the core libraries, we don't hack core in Drupal 7. If anybody hacks core, then they just don't know what they're doing. We're writing custom modules, but really few. The typical ones that I see is form alterations, service integrations. I think the requirement or the amount of knowledge that will be needed for a typical build is not going to be that drastic. At least that's what I hope. And I think the market momentum is big enough so that people will just suck it up and move on and learn it.
I hope that one of the problems that it will help us solve is getting people to do Symphony shop is going to be a potential ally once Drupal 8 comes out, because you'll have people that understand a lot more of what's going on in Drupal, and you can get them up to speed with it quickly.
Yes.
And then you have another army of developers that we're missing right now. That might actually got that.
Or will be able to be contribute better. Right now, chunking, I would say all that. So, chunking people don't see that.
Yep. All right, thank you very much. These are my contact details. We're hiring, so if you guys want, we can get you a job. Just give me as a referral, and I will invite you for a nice dinner. Yes? No, not him. I want the referral fee. So thank you very much, and if you have any questions, just have a chat with me at any time.